Serving staff, what's the most awkward first date you've seen go down while working? At the end of the dinner, two couples on a double date dine and dash. I chased them down and the girls had no clue. Their dates had told them they'd already paid. The girls ended up paying. The guys had no cash. As a former server, I have to say it's not the first dates that stick out, it's the "we're breaking up and let's have dinner and talk about it" tables that really stay with you. My wife broke up with me while we were dating at an Indian restaurant. We made up and have been married about 8 years now, but it took a darn long time before I could eat Indian food again. More sad than awkward, a guy in a wheelchair came in at about 1:45. Says he has a date at 3, but the only ride he had there was early. So I sat him at a table for 2, he munches on bread for a while and decides to go outside for a bit. He ends up coming in about 20 minutes later and starts telling me and the host I'm working with cheesy jokes. He also mentions that he used to be a policeman before he became wheelchair-bound. He also told us his date is from Panama. The other host and I had a bad feeling about this situation at that point. 3 o'clock rolls around and I see the guy anxiously glancing between his phone and the door. About 45 minutes of this pass before he finally leaves. This was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. I was a line cook at a restaurant. It was a typical Friday night and pretty busy in the kitchen. A server came in and asked if I spoke Chinese. I said yes, and he told me to go talk to some guest at a table. I told him they'll have to wait because we're in the middle of a dinner rush. About an hour later, things slow down a little, so I follow up with the server. He proceeded to point out the table of guests that needed help. So I walked out of the kitchen with the expectation of maybe translating the menu for them or something. When I got up to the table, I noticed it was a white guy and an Asian girl. So I asked the gentleman how I could help him. He then asked me to translate for him. It was at that point that I realized they were on a first date. The guy asked me to translate a few things for him like, "How did you enjoy the dinner?" and "Did you enjoy the date so far?" and other small talk. And I'd have to translate that to the girl and translate her response back to English for him. This went on for about 5 to 10 minutes. Eventually, he asked me to ask the girl if she wanted to sleep with him. The girl asked him if he had a girlfriend. I had to stand there and translate this conversation. Eventually, the girl shot the guy down, and it got pretty awkward at that point, so I found an excuse to go back to the kitchen. In short, had to translate for a guy and asked the girl if she wanted to do the deed with him. I'm honestly just flabbergasted that they arranged this date with such a big hurdle in making basic conversation in place. I think if I had to do this while working, they'd have to get one question in at a time between me, doing my job that they're keeping me from. A young couple was at my table. They were probably 16. She was way overdressed for Red Lobster and a movie, but that was cute. He went to pay and his card was declined. I felt so horrible walking back to the table. He said there should be plenty in his bank account and I asked if he'd put gas in his car before the date. He said he filled up his truck. Some gas stations here hold the amount twice on a debit card after a certain hour and it drops off the next day. The poor kid was so embarrassed he had no idea what to do. My boss paid for his meal, my tip, and gave him money for the movie they were planning to go to. The kid came back in 2 days later with all of the money to pay my boss back. Man, this story. I've never associated Red Lobster with classy, but your boss changed that. I can't believe he even gave some cash for the movie, too. Bartender here. Had a guy this past summer come in for Match.com meetups 4 different times with 4 different ladies. For one of his dates, he told everyone else at the bar that he was from Match.com. His date was late, so everyone at the bar was concerned for him. He told everyone to clap when she arrived. When she finally came, everyone at the bar clapped and cheered. She was horribly embarrassed. No wonder why this guy doesn't hold on to girls for long. She'll be on guard from the second she walks in the door. Why not just get everyone in the place to yell out, "Norm!" Had a professor in college that had us clap when a student would walk in late. He had a really good laugh when we did it when he was late. I'm a hostess, and when we seat people, we have to talk about the specials happening that day. Well, anywho, 2 people came in and they don't appear to be a couple. Both were very stern looking. I started giving my spiel about the drink specials, and she cuts me off and says she won't be drinking tonight. The guy looks at her and asks why. She tells him that she's pregnant. And let's keep in mind that I'm right here between them with no option to walk away because I'm still holding the menus. Well, he freaks out, quickly questioning her, and getting very angry, she starts yelling at him. A lot of tension is floating around, and in the midst of all this anger about being pregnant, I chime in and mention that we're also having a special on our baby back ribs. The moment after I realize what I just said, they're staring at me with their jaws dropped. I look them dead in the eye and walk away. I'm not good in these types of situations. Yes, we have some baby back ribs on special, as well as a nice Asian stir-fry with baby bok choy and baby corn. We also have a lobster special that of course comes with a bib. There's also a cheese platter featuring Baby Bell. What can I get started for you? This happened to a friend of mine. We'll call him Alex. Because for this situation, we need a unisex first name. He's on a blind date with a friend of a friend. Alex gets a table at a fairly fancy restaurant that his friend Steve works at as a manager. He arrives first and she gets there about 15 minutes late. No big deal, they chat over drinks. At this point, he doesn't think it's going super great, but doesn't think it's too awkward. At some point after they ordered their food, she excuses herself to the bathroom. A minute or so after she leaves the table, he gets a text on his phone. It's from his date. It says something along the lines of, "I hate blind dates. This guy is a total loser. At least I'll get a few free meals out of him." Alex realizes that the text wasn't meant for him, but for his date's female friend, also called Alex. He gets up from the table and finds Steve in the back and tells him what happened, asks for his half of the order taken off the ticket, and then leaves before she gets back to the table. Alex's date comes back from the bathroom, apparently unaware that she texted the wrong person. Due to some mix-up, the entire order still arrives at the table. Reportedly, she didn't even wait for or even question Alex's absence before she began eating. In fact, she finishes nearly all of her meal before asking her waiter to check where Alex had gone. The waiter checks with his manager, Steve, finds out about the situation and informs her that Alex left while she was in the bathroom. He then hands her the check. The best part is that she didn't have enough money to cover the check. She had to call her friend to come down to the restaurant and pay for her meal. Steve wasn't too keen on letting her slide on the bill. In short, woman accidentally texts her date about only going out with him for free food. He sticks her with the check. I have been waiting so long to tell this story. So I'm a server at Red Robin, and I once served a teenage couple, probably around 17 or 18, easily seniors in high school. They'd obviously been dating for a while since they already knew what they wanted and ordered for each other. The date night seemed to go pretty well. They ordered their drinks, ordered an appetizer, then ordered their food. Only their drinks had come out, yet when finally holding hands for a long while, the guy looks into the girl's eyes and apparently broke up with her. I'd been standing from a distance, keeping an eye on my tables, when suddenly I see this happening and watch the girl's face just turn from happiness to absolute horror. Tears well up and she starts banging her fists on the table, screaming out at him that he's a butthole and whatnot. Everyone in the restaurant can hear it and everything just stops. As she's becoming more and more volatile, he's trying to calm her down. I'm not sure what to do at this point. Even my manager had come out and looked at me as if we both don't know how to handle this. Finally, the guy yells, Fine. If you don't want to be civil, then I'll go." She begs him to stay, but he pries himself away and beelines for the door. She doesn't follow him. He passes me on the way to the door, stops and walks back towards me. He hands me $50 and says, "You can obviously already see why I did what I did. I'm just sorry that you had to deal with this here and now. Take care of her and make sure she's okay." He then leaves. She sat for the next 3 hours, not crying but just staring blankly into the wall. She ate both of their meals and the tower of onion rings. On another note, a lady crapped herself at my work once. In short, broke up, broke down, and broke waistline. I'm somewhat unclear whether the lady that made brown in the server's workplace was one and the same person who ate the 2 meals and the tower of onion rings. It seems very probable, but it's written in such a way that they've preserved the mystery. Seems like the cherry or piece of gooey fudge on top of this miserable experience. Guy comes in alone and asks for a table for 2. I seat him in the corner in a booth where it's quiet and secluded. He says his date should be here any minute. I get him the beer he ordered and a bunch of chips and salsa. 20 minutes later, he's on his second beer and he promises me that she's going to be here soon. She just texted him and said she's on her way. I really don't care because it's really slow and I like the guy because he's super low maintenance. I brought him out some queso to go with the chips he was eating alone. An hour goes by. There were 2 instances of a single woman coming in saying she was meeting someone, and both of those women were directed to this guy. But neither of them were his date. Now I'm just kind of feeling bad for the poor fella. 3 hours after I sat him down, he had had 9 beers, and I brought him a few rounds of shots occasionally just because we, the entire staff, felt so bad for him. He was fricking lit. He goes out the back door to start chucking up in an alleyway, as his date finally walks through the door. I sat her down at their table, get her a drink, and then went out back to give the guy a smoke and let him know his date was here. He was not happy. I walked him back inside, sat him down, and watched them formally introduce each other. I didn't realize this was a blind date. I left awkwardly and immediately. They paid and left maybe 5 minutes after that, just enough for the lady to finish her drink. I guess she gave him a ride home, but I don't really know. I didn't think she was actually going to show up, otherwise I'd have cut him off well before that. Oh well, hope he got some action that night. Who does she think she is, showing up 3 hours late for a date? To be somewhat fair, when she did arrive, she looked like she'd been crying her eyes out and seemed incredibly flustered. I didn't want to pry, especially considering the drunk mess she was about to have a date with. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode, also linked below, and subscribe. Well, I'm assuming bartending is close enough to serving staff since I did serve the food as well. I did this for a number of years, but one story, man, this stands out. This younger lady came in by herself, comes up to the bar, and says she'd like a table in the back alone. It's a slow night and I was working alone, so I sat her, brought her a drink. She's there for about an hour, has a couple of drinks and keeps checking her phone. I finally ask her if she's expecting someone and her response was a sad smile and a nod. Almost immediately after that, this guy, early 30s, comes in and asks for a table for two. This guy reeks of D-bag. On his arm is this slightly trashy, very early 20s girl who's already drunk, loud, and freaking obnoxious. She keeps talking about how lucky she is to finally get this guy out with her. How it's been the best first date ever. I get them their food order and they can barely keep their hands off each other. I also notice that the lady sitting by herself has gone white as a ghost and is shaking a little bit. She takes out her cell phone and takes a few pictures. About this point, I know what's going on and I just try to avoid it. Lady number one walks up, puts some papers down on the table and says, "We're getting divorced." She then looks at the lady who turns out to be her little sister and tells her to never talk to her again. She then comes up, pays for her meal and walks out, leaving the most utterly destroyed first date I've ever seen. It was phenomenal. Yeah, I got a few more of the details when she came back later. But her husband didn't know it was his sister-in-law. And this was not the first time he'd cheated, just the first time with the sister. So maybe a stretch, but I figured it was close. Yay, something I can finally answer. I once had a table where this guy came in for a blind date. When the girl got there, it was obvious she was already a little tipsy. Well, a little ways into the meal and after having one drink, she chucked up all over herself at the table. She went to the bathroom and the guy had to ask another server to go and check on her. In the bathroom, she also proceeded to empty her guts all over the toilet seat. I felt so bad for the guy, but he was so nice about it. He waited for her to get cleaned up and took her home. That must have been the most awkward car ride ever. We have a rich, middle-aged dude that comes in almost every Friday with a new date. A couple of servers I work with have a pool if the date will last shorter or longer than 30 minutes. Unders have won, probably 70% of the time. I think the best story I heard from one of his dates was when he asked where the lady was from. She answered Miami and he told her to leave. Weird dude. I was a waitress in college. A couple came in and sat at my table. Just your average Minnesota man and a nice Latina lady. They started chatting and it immediately became clear to me that she speaks no English. None. It turns out I'm fluent in Spanish, so I went back to take their order, and I sat and translated for them for a bit. It was awkward, but okay. I went back a few minutes later to drop off their appetizer, and this man looks at me and says, "I can't do this. Tell her I'm leaving." I said, "No, absolutely not." He said, "Well, I'm leaving whether you tell her or not, so you probably should." As I started to panic, both of them just burst out laughing. Turns out they're regulars that have been married for 20 years. They were trolling me after a friend told them I spoke Spanish. That is devious and brilliant. I hope they tipped you supremely well, madam. This one starts out awkward, but it takes a bit of a turn. I'm a host. I sat a gentleman very well dressed named Greg, who told me he was meeting a girl for their first date. About half an hour passes and no one shows up. It's a Sunday night, so it's pretty slow. I came by and checked on him. He hadn't heard from her or anything. Another half hour, then another. He finishes his entree, pays, and walks up to me and says, "Damn, she's not coming. Whatever." I try to convince him to stick it out at the bar for a little bit, but he isn't having it. He leaves. 20 minutes later, a girl shows up. She says her phone is dead and her car broke down on the way to her date with a guy named Greg. I say he got fed up and left, and she starts to cry because she really thinks she messed up. I tell her it'll be okay. The guy signed up for a rewards program and we had his cell number. Officially, I'm not supposed to do this, but I called him back up and told him his date was here, and he didn't believe me, so I put her on the phone and he was back 20 minutes later. They seemed to really hit it off, and as he left he said, "Thanks, man," and he slipped me a $5. The only direct tip I've ever gotten. They just came in together yesterday. It makes me really happy that they're still dating. I was working at a restaurant and this guy I'd met a few days before came in before my shift ended to wait for me. He was going to take me out as soon as I finished. He was a few hours early. I brought him a drink and told him it would be a while, and he said that was fine. The place got pretty busy, and after a while I noticed there was a girl sitting down with him having a drink. I went over to bring him another beer, and she was drinking as well. I served them more drinks, he introduced her as an old friend from school, and she kind of just gave me a quick up and down, seemed annoyed, and started chatting away with him, giggling at everything he said. It was a bit weird to watch. My boss asked me if I could stay late because it had become so busy, but I said no. I'm actually going on a date and pointed him out. She laughed and said, "Really? With the guy who's been drinking with that other girl?" I sheepishly said yes. The girl had left just before I was done, but he was pretty drunk by that point, so I asked him if he still wanted to go, and he said, "Of course." Anyway, he ended up being so wasted that I left and went home. I went out with him again and again. He got way too drunk and passed out each time. I turned him down the next time he asked. About a year later, I was working at a different bar and they walked in newlyweds. I found this out when she told the bartender she wanted to beat me up or something because I was trying to take her man. She didn't, and I told the bartender what happened, but I'd be interested to hear how she perceived what was happening. So yeah, that was pretty much the most awkward first date I've seen while working as a waitress, and it was mine. So I work at Great American Cookies as a cake decorator, and we get "Will you be my date" cakes all the time. Sometimes the customers give us flowers or a card to give to the person that comes to pick it up. Like boyfriend orders cake, gives us a flower, girlfriend picks up cake, and we give her the flower. Kind of like singing messengers. One day an older male came up and ordered a cake for his wife's birthday and asked if we could give her an envelope as she was the one to pick it up. Just curious, we asked him what was in it. He said tell her to open it there with us and she'd tell us all about it, that it was a surprise. We agreed and he paid for the cake, and later that day the wife comes up and gets the cake and envelope. She loves her cake even though it's pretty simple, and opens the envelope as he had instructed. She starts bawling her eyes out. This guy had had us serve her the divorce papers. We noticed he was standing only a few feet away. He was a scumbag Steve if I've ever seen one. Long story short, we don't take envelopes without the customers telling us exactly what's inside from then on. Oh, and he got us to serve papers for free when anyone else would have charged $50. Didn't even tip us for having to deal with his crying, soon-to-be ex-wife. In short, scumbag Steve made a cake decorator serve his wife divorce papers when she came to pick up her birthday cake. Not really a waiter, but I worked as a barista and witnessed numerous obvious first dates. One time, this super nerdy guy brings in this pretty attractive girl. I'm rooting for him because I used to be quite nerdy and had a tough time with the ladies. Anyway, the guy starts talking on and on about his favorite sci-fi and fantasy books, as well as some card game that sounded similar to D&D. There's nothing wrong with those interests, but the girl was clearly not receptive. She was giving him all kinds of physical and verbal cues that she wanted to change the discussion. But this guy would not stop talking. While I was watching, I wanted to help him, tell him to change the subject or something, but I couldn't think of any smooth way to help him out. Maybe it was because he was nervous. He gets up to go to the bathroom and knocks the table, which causes the girl's hot latte to be spilled all over her front. He apologized profusely, but you could see that she had checked out of the date. She left after drying herself. I hope he found a girl that appreciates sci-fi books and Piers Anthony as much as he does. You should have spilled coffee on him to shut him up. Whisper to him, "You can thank me later." Mum comes in earlier that day and tells me she's helping her son plan his first date. She asked if I could help her make everything look really fancy and all the good stuff. I didn't have much to do that day, so I said, why not? I got everything ready for them. I held a great table with a great view of the ocean for them, chilled a bottle of apple cider by their table, got a dessert tray ready. It was fancy. Heck, I would have loved to go on that date. I kid you not, little Billy and Susie were staring at their cell phones the entire time. It was a dimly lit place, all you could see was the candlelight and their faces because of their phones. I was teed off. I'd been ready to give this kid a high five on the way out, to give him a, "Go get her, son." But no, I was ashamed instead. Oh, I also planned a proposal for this guy and all of their friends. He was supposed to do it on the beach before they came in, got cold feet and had to hide all of his friends. He texted us saying he'd do it on the table. Got cold feet before dessert and nothing. I was honestly feeding his friends all the bread we had in the place because we were waiting for them. Finally, he did it, she said yes, and we all cheered. Good times. Not a first date, but very awkward. A guy comes in with an escort and drops a good amount of money on booze at the bar. She then leaves a few hours later and he informs us that his wife is on her way to meet him for dinner and tips us an extra $200 to keep our mouths shut. Keeping it classy. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.